So our purpose is to help you improve, help you get better, help you enhance relationships, help you reduce that cost, that handbrake on performance, get better at relationships and results. So what we're doing here is going to take a brief look at these viruses that affect the health and the efficacy, the vitality and the productivity of your organisations, your teams, and indeed even your family relationships. Here's the first one. It's called a culture of resistance. Culture of resistance is basically you find your go-to people and you rely on them to produce results, to handle the tough decisions you were referring to earlier on with that enterprise discussion and negotiation. Leaders are responsible to drive the change while the rest of us kind of sit back and expect them to do it all, largely. They get paid the big bucks, right? Here's the unwritten rule. We expect you to do your least and drag your feet. Has anyone ever heard of engagement? Who's done an engagement survey in recent times? Did that help you? The shaking of her head down the back there. It didn't help. So this notion of engagement connects very strongly with this virus called the culture of resistance. We create the very conditions that cause people to deliver less than their best, less than their full potential. Staggering, isn't it? We expect you to do your least and drag your feet. A guy called Daniel Yankelevich did a study. This was of the American workforce. And there are great similarities here in Australia. In the American workforce, he asked the question, amongst others, he said, how many of you do just enough in your job to survive, to not get the sack? Do you know what the boundary conditions are before you get the sack? How many of you do just enough? 44%, half the population, near enough, said, I'm going to do just enough not to get the sack. That's a reflection of engagement or disengagement, is it not? People aren't offering that discretionary effort. What they're doing is they're working to rule. They're working to a boundary condition to survive. And we often find that this plays out in our accountability or our lack of accountability conversations as well. There's a tax. Every time this happens, there's a tax on our ability to execute at a superior level and to innovate consistently for the future. There's the tax. There's a cost. There's a number. There's a numeric that bears down on our organisations. Whether we're in healthcare, policing, commercial enterprise, construction, it makes no difference. That virus is alive. It's well, it's kicking. The question for you as leaders of influence is how significant is it? And what can I do? How can I influence its reduction? How can I close a gap between where it's at today and where I need it to be for our performance going forward? That's the challenge for leaders. Your job is to influence what people think, what they feel, and how they act. That's your job as a leader. So let's move on to the next one, shall we? The next exciting virus is the virus that's called a culture of silence. People struggle to speak up, and that includes the accountability conversations I mentioned to you earlier on, the gap closing conversations between what we expect of each other and what we actually do. Characterised by avoidance or a lack of skill, characterised by defensive routines. People get defensive about what they're thinking, feeling and doing for a vast array of reasons. Completely understandable and deeply ineffective, given our goals and missions, purposes and desires, families and work. Who's avoided having one of those tough conversations in your family in recent living memory? Okay? So just move across the fence to the workplace. Who's avoided one in the workplace in recent living memory? Of course we have. It's normal, it's natural, and completely understandable. It is also deeply ineffective and lacks a huge amount of influence, the potential you have to influence the outcomes that you're in part responsible for. So, here's the unwritten rule. I like the way we express this. It sounds like this. It's not written in policy, by the way, not usually, right? And as we value harmony over results. Now, it's not that harmony is a bad thing or that results is a bad thing, The question here is, can you do both? Can you intentionally, deliberately, purposefully pursue the results you want, need, or required to produce, and concurrently have those tough conversations in a way which is purposeful, it's skillful, it's respectful, it's honouring, it honours one another, it lifts and enhances the relationship to a place of high performance, great integrity. When Brad says he's going to do something, take it to the bank, mate. When Brad doesn't deliver, please, let's have the conversation. In fact, the greatest form of accountability is not when you hold me accountable, it's when I step up to the accountability knowingly, willingly, and with integrity. You see, commitment-based cultures are so much more effective and so much less expensive than compliance-based cultures. Who works in a compliance-based culture? Many of us are required to by law, or they're required to by the very nature of the organisation we operate. Have a think about that. You'll get the greatest level of engagement or discretionary effort from your people when you create conditions that drive commitment rather than compliance. One of our research studies looked at projects and strategies. It's called our Silence Fails research. If you're interested in getting a copy of the paper, you can get it from our website, or you can ask Jeff. But basically, 85% of project managers were questioned, and they say they've been given projects that were designed to fail, or they knew that they were going to fail. How many of you in the room have experienced that? You've been given a project, you've been made responsible for a strategy, you've been given a particular task, and you knew, because of your experience or whatever else, you knew it was destined for a brick wall. It was destined for mediocrity or failure or distress. Yeah? So in the study, 85% they said they had. Only 14% of those 85 felt that they could actually speak up and have a tough conversation with the sponsor of the project, or the managing director, or the secretary of the department, whoever it was that was charged with that particular. So there's a huge gap, isn't there? A huge gap. Let's look at nursing in healthcare. 82% of nurses say that they believe they have an incompetent colleague. How about that? So if you're interested, you can look at our Silence Kills research. And I mean that intensely and seriously. This set of behaviours tends to cause death. And I won't go into them now, but the statistics are staggering. Only 21% said they could speak up to that colleague. They felt they had, one, the encouragement, two, the skills to do that. Huge gap, aren't they? These are big gaps. Let's look at the next one. It's a culture of cynicism. By the way, anyone got that alive and well in your organisation? Okay, a culture of cynicism. Leaders make promises, fail to deliver. Leaders don't carry sufficient influence to affect how you're thinking, you're feeling, and you're doing on a daily basis. You see, leadership is influence. That's it. That's all there is. It's how we treat one another and how we share information on a daily basis, including when we have a tough conversation around a gap that needs to close, a gap that needs to be reduced. Here's the unwritten rule. Hang in there, buddy, it'll all go away. Just wait it out. There's nothing you can bring my way I haven't seen before. And you know, the interesting thing about these viruses is we socialise them. We breathe life into them by the very things we choose to do. We breathe life into these darn things. That's why they're so challenging. They're so difficult to overcome. And quite frankly, in many cases, a training program isn't enough. It only gets you so far. The good news is we have answers. We've done this before. We know what the conditions are to transition from where you are to where you truly want to be. We've got 30 years of applied research, lots of rich testimonies and case studies of what we've been doing in this country and around the world that makes a profound difference. Culture of collusion. We collude with one another. Don't confront me and I won't confront you. That's the unwritten rule. It's an interesting rule, isn't it? This is a social contract I make with my work colleagues. If we agree to do this, I'll look after you and you look after me. We'll survive leadership and management. We'll survive that merger and acquisition. We'll survive that restructure. We'll survive that change. If we can agree, this is the way we'll operate. We actually make that our unwritten rule, regardless of what policy, procedure, any sort of strategic imperative might say and how it might be expressed. We socially engage in this contract. We know also that this is an absolute pathway to mediocrity. Just enough. Just enough to stay in the market. Just enough to stay employed. Just enough to stay in existence. I'm going to demonstrate that to you by looking at a simple animation that helps to describe what we can produce as change leaders in our organisations by removing or reducing the effect of these viruses, by restoring health, particularly in the area of accountability gaps. Having those daily gap closing conversations that I mentioned earlier on that help us then to execute on our mission and innovate for the future. We'll pick a muscle as a metaphor. When we can get people to routinely engage in self-directed change, can routinely offer that discretionary effort we talked about before, we see that kind of lift in our performance around innovation and execution. When we can add open dialogue, read our crucial conversations skill set, principles and skills, it goes up even further. When we can lift it with the whole skill set we're about to work on, this universal accountability, this day-to-day practice of closing the accountability gap, see what happens to innovation and execution. And when we bring along influential leaders as well, people who can deeply affect what people are thinking, how they feel about that and what they do with it, 111% improvement in our ability to innovate successfully for the future, 91% improvement in our capacity to execute our mission, deliver our projects, deliver our strategies for change at a superior level of performance, not a mediocre, adequate level of performance. So we've got three options for dealing with these gaps. The first one is to avoid them and remain silent. Not particularly healthy. There are consequences. Low bar, low standard. There's a cost. We've talked about that already. We can intimidate, we can threaten, we can compel others, we can coerce others. Anyone ever tried that? Let's be honest in the room, we've all typically tried that with our kids, with our families, in our family setting, right? Just ponder that for but a moment, because often that's the place where we learn what to do somewhere else. No doubt you've got your own versions, whether it's rumour mongering, whether it is working out how to get around policy, whether it's finding innovative ways to do kind of enough to survive, that's another option. So this whole notion of coercion or force is very ineffective, very ineffective. And so we lead ourselves to the third option, which is to speak up skillfully. And that's what we're going to explore now, how to do that. How to speak up skillfully and improve the health of our relationships and organisations. You know, it's a function of the average time lag between becoming aware of and identifying a problem or a gap and actually discussing the reasons for it and how to close it together. All right? So if you want to improve the health and well-being of relationships and organisations, this is the key here. Reduce the time. Reduce the time. In fact, our research says that if you can have a daily accountability conversation in effect about the small stuff, Brad turns up late to your meetings and he does it consistently. He's done it. It's a pattern of behaviour. He's always running around like a mad thing. He turns up late to the meeting. It happened 14 times in the last 3 weeks. Having a conversation about that apparently small disappointment has a six-fold or 600% benefit when it comes to large disappointments, prospect of large or catastrophic failure to meet commitments, failure to meet deadlines, those sorts of things. It has an effect when we get good at having those conversations on a daily basis. So let's examine a few of the skills we need to introduce that gap. Here's our process. And this process model, this is our process for holding crucial accountability conversations, or those gap closing conversations. 3 pieces, or 3 as a chronology here. What do we do before the conversation? What do we do during the conversation? And what should we do after the conversation? So we have some guiding principles. I need to work on me first, not the other person. I need to get myself sorted out first before I have this tough, often risky and emotional conversation with others. Work on me first. We're going to look at a couple of those skills this morning. Then we need to sort of get our meaning into the conversation. Mine and others into the conversation. We're going to have a quick look at how do I start the conversation, as David referred to earlier on. Do I start with power and position, or do I start with relationship and influence? Do I start with curiosity? And then finally, we're going to have a quick look at this skill here. How do I diagnose what's causing the behaviour that's producing the gap? Can I get to a place of understanding so that together we can close that gap? That's the conversation skills. And then finally, how are we going to move to action together? How are we going to actually close the gap that we've agreed on? So this is effectively a dialogue process. For those of you who may have looked at our Crucial Conversations dialogue process and model, there are only a couple of things that are specific, the describing of the gap and the diagnostic skills here in what we call the 6 sources of influence. 6 sources influence our human behaviour pretty much at any time. We all do what we do because we want to and we can. We want to and we can. We're motivated and we're able. We'll have a quick look at that this morning as well. Give you a chance to apply that. So we're going to move now into the actual training platform, give you some access, very high level, to 4 skills: getting unstuck, mastering my stories and describing the gap, along with then diagnosing why the gaps occurred in the first place using that 6 sources of influence model. In your slides here, if you so want them, the other modules of the 9 modules in the training program are described as well. We don't have time to go through those this morning. But they are very, very functional, very practical, very effective in increasing your influence in closing those gaps. So this notion of a gap, I'm just going to run through a few of these examples for you. Who's got respect in your code of conduct? Respect one another. Yeah? The gap. How many of you saw someone in the last 3 weeks, 5 weeks, treated without respect, or a less than a respectful way? Again, we see those gaps pretty commonly, don't we? Becomes insulting. Direct reports, timesheets. There's now a gap. It's Monday afternoon, they haven't been delivered. Something as simple as that. Your boss said he'd ask for help setting timelines. Guess what? Commits to an impossible timeline without getting your input. That's a gap. I expected this, I experienced something else. Teenage son. Tattoos aren't allowed in our family for whatever reason, and guess what? Comes home with some unacceptable body art. Okay? An accountant expects our clients operate within the law. Guess what? They're violating the law. There's a gap. Clinical staff will hold one another accountable for professional behaviour, and a nurse doesn't speak up when a physician becomes disruptive for whatever reason. So these gaps are pretty remarkable, and as we said, our process here is what do we do before, during and after that conversation to close the gap? How can we equip ourselves and be encouraged to do it and do it remarkably well? At the centre of dialogue